The Pyramids of Giza serve as a fitting representation of ancient Egyptian society during the 4th dynasty. Just as the tombs of courtiers and laborers were built around the pharaoh's own funerary complex, the nation as a whole reflected a similar reliance on royal authority. Members of the elite often portrayed themselves as humble scribes, highlighting their loyalty and service to the king. Inscriptions found on tomb walls further echoed this culture of devotion and submission. It is not by chance that one of the most enduring funerary formulae in ancient Egypt first emerged during this period. Inscribed in tomb chapels, on offering tables, and later on coffins, it conveyed the belief that all offerings and sustenance for the deceased and their funerary cult stemmed from the generosity of the king. This concept was encapsulated in the phrase, "an offering which the king gives." The growing reverence for the monarch was also reflected in personal names, where the names of gods were increasingly replaced by those of reigning pharaohs. Children with names like Khufu might have grown up with little distinction between the king and the sun god. The design of royal mortuary temples, modeled deliberately on the shrines of deities, further blurred the line between divine and royal. This transformation in the relationship between ruler and subjects marked a significant elevation of the monarchy, seen not only in Giza but across even the most distant territories of Egypt. Inscriptions found in the harsh mountains of Sinai in the northeast and on isolated rock formations in the southwestern desert provide evidence of state-sponsored expeditions launched by Khufu and his successors. These missions aimed to retrieve valuable stones for the royal workshops, where they would be crafted into statues, jewelry, and other luxurious items that reinforced the king's authority and magnificence. The extravagant, even decadent, nature of Khufu's court is perhaps most vividly illustrated by 2 tombs discovered near the Great Pyramid. One belonged to a dwarf named Pranyanku, who likely entertained the king and his family through singing and dancing, similar to a jester in a medieval court. Such scenes of celebration and indulgence in the royal palace stand in stark contrast to the lives of laborers who, after a day of grueling work on the Giza plateau, returned to their cramped quarters to rest. The second tomb contained belongings intended for the king's mother, offering a rare glimpse into the lifestyle of royalty during Egypt's 4th dynasty. Hetepheres, wife of the famed pyramid builder Sneferu and mother of Khufu, was likely a royal daughter herself. Her elevated status was reflected in her luxurious way of life. She traveled in a gilded chair adorned with ebony panels and gold-inlaid hieroglyphs that listed her numerous titles: Mother of the Dual King, Follower of Horus, Advisor to the Ruler, and the Gracious One, whose every word was obeyed. If these titles accurately reflect reality, it seems Hetepheres may have been the only person Khufu answered to. The impression of a mobile royal household is further supported by the other furnishings in her burial chamber, including a bed with a detachable canopy and 2 compact chairs. The furniture was elegant and simple, yet finely crafted from rich materials, designed for easy transport and assembly. This combination of refinement and mobility captured the confident yet understated opulence that characterized the 4th dynasty. Among her most cherished items were her jewelry boxes, one of which was custom-made to hold 20 silver bracelets. A depiction of Hetepheres in her traveling chair shows her wearing 14 of these bracelets along one arm. At the time, silver was more valuable than gold. The bracelets were further embellished with turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, presenting a dazzling image of a queen whose appearance matched her royal status as the mother of a powerful king. Even Khufu, however, could not escape death. Around 2525 BC, he passed away and was laid to rest in his monumental pyramid at Giza. His funeral was conducted by his son and successor, Jetefra. Unlike his father, Jetefra did not continue the tradition of building massive monuments. He chose to construct a smaller pyramid at a new location on the northern edge of the Memphite necropolis. There may also have been a deeper reason for this relocation. The site faced the city of Unu, the major center of the sun god Ra's worship. Jetefra appeared deeply devoted to Ra, embracing the sun's radiance as a metaphor for supreme royal power. He aligned himself with this symbolism, seeking to establish a divine connection between king and sun god that paralleled the monumental legacy of his father. His name, meaning Ra speaks, publicly reinforced this association, and he took the unprecedented step of adopting the title Son of Ra. This marked a clear departure from older traditions that centered on Horus, the falcon god, and signaled the dynasty's intent to redefine kingship on its own terms. Under Jedefre's rule, the cult of Ra rapidly gained prominence, eventually becoming the most influential religious movement in Egypt. Ra himself rose to an unparalleled position in the Egyptian pantheon. The two dominant themes of Fourth Dynasty kingship converged in the reign of Jedefre's younger brother and successor, Khafra, who came to power around 2500 BCE. He returned to Giza and built his pyramid beside Khufu's, but cleverly selected a slightly higher elevation. Although his pyramid stood slightly shorter than Khufu's, it appeared taller due to its position. A grand causeway descended from Khafra's pyramid to the Valley Temple, which was clad in polished red granite, a stone strongly linked to solar symbolism. Inside, the temple featured a hall paved with brilliant white calcite, symbolizing purification, and was surrounded by 23 life-size statues of the king. These depicted Khafra seated in majesty, with the falcon god Horus perched behind his head in a protective stance. Each statue was sculpted from a single block of black and white banded gneiss, transported from a distant quarry in the western desert. With carefully managed lighting, the effect must have been extraordinary. Yet Khafra's most iconic creation was still to come. He ordered the carving of a natural rock outcrop near his valley temple into the form of a colossal reclining lion with a human head. This majestic sculpture symbolized Khafra's fusion with the sun god and repositioned the entire Giza complex around his own monument. In doing so, Khufu's son not only equaled the Great Pyramid. 3 generations of immense effort went into the pyramid-building enterprises, reshaping Egypt but also placing a heavy burden on its resources. Khafra's successor, Menkaure, was the last to build at Giza. His pyramid was significantly smaller, rising only 216 feet and possessing just a tenth of the volume of Khufu's. Architects tried to compensate by lavishly using red granite, transported from the southern regions, and by constructing a more expansive temple where Menkaure's funerary rituals continued for centuries. Still, the era of giant pyramids had ended. Future kings would need new methods to assert their dominance. An Arabic proverb says, "Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids." The Great Pyramid remains one of the most ambitious architectural feats of antiquity. Khufu, its builder, stood as a towering figure of his age. Yet, in a twist of archaeological irony, the only surviving image of him from his own era is a small ivory statue barely 3 inches tall. Found in the ruins of a temple at Abydos, the figure shows the king seated, wearing the red crown and holding the royal flail. While the symbols of authority are unmistakable, the size is strikingly modest. Once viewed as an autocrat, Khufu has, over time, been quite literally reduced in scale by history. In a crucial respect, the seeming stability of the Pyramid Age was largely a facade. Beneath the surface of royal grandeur, there were signs of internal discord within the ruling family. Amid dynastic tensions during the height of the Fourth Dynasty, subsequent rulers of the Old Kingdom took deliberate action to reassert control over royal succession. These measures eventually laid the groundwork for a different form of kingship and a new social order that would emerge over the next 3 centuries, following the end of pyramid construction at Giza. Considering that Egyptian pharaohs commonly had multiple wives, it is hardly unexpected that their children would compete for influence, as would the mothers themselves. Although such internal power struggles are absent from official records, which aim to portray an image of unshakable royal harmony, subtle clues hint at these hidden rivalries. These include notably brief reigns amid otherwise steady dynastic rule and abrupt policy changes, such as the shift of royal burial sites from Giza to Saqqara at the close of the Fourth Dynasty. After the uninspiring reign of Menkaure's heir, Shepseskaf, a new ruling house emerged. The Fifth Dynasty began with King Userkaf. From the beginning of his reign, he sought to mark a distinct new era, establishing himself as a reformer of governance and kingship. His choice of burial site made this break clear. Disregarding Shepseskaf's unconventional tomb design, Userkaf returned to the classic pyramid structure. More importantly, he located his pyramid at the edge of the ancient step pyramid complex of Nedjeriket, Djoser, a monument already 2 centuries old and revered. In doing so, Userkaf drew a direct connection to a legendary figure of Egypt's past, signaling that, like Djoser's reign, his own would signify a renewed beginning. Yet Userkaf's vision of kingship diverged sharply from the image projected by earlier pyramid builders. While the massive tombs of Netrikit and the 4th dynasty kings embodied raw political dominance, Userkaf placed greater emphasis on the sacred dimension of his role. His pyramid, modest at just 161 feet tall, was overshadowed by a more groundbreaking structure, a dedicated sun temple at Abusir, situated between Saqqara and Giza. This bold innovation was as significant in its own way as the step pyramid had once been. The sun temple, named Nekanare, consisted of a walled stone compound with a symbolic mound at its center. It was built to highlight the pharaoh's unique and divine connection to the sun god. Ra ceremonies were conducted in its open-air courtyard, where offerings were made under the sun's rays on an altar placed before the mound. According to period hieroglyphs, the mound may have even supported a wooden perch, allowing the sun god to descend and rest. Appropriately for a structure dedicated to the foremost deity, the sun temple had its own estates and priesthood, functioning as a major institution in its own right. In fact, offerings intended for the royal mortuary temple were often routed through the sun temple, symbolically sanctifying the supplies before they reached the king's cult. In this way, the sun temple acted as a divine intermediary, reinforcing the sacred legitimacy of the pharaoh's rule. The sun temples commissioned by Userkaf and his successors during the 5th dynasty represented a bold shift in how Egyptian kingship was portrayed. As the monarchy could no longer afford the massive expenses of building colossal pyramids, it sought new ways to affirm its authority and prominence atop the social hierarchy. This transformation involved elevating the king's image even further from that of ordinary mortals, drawing a closer and more defined connection between the ruler and the divine realm. In the earliest dynasties, royal ideology had centered on the king as a living embodiment of the ancient sky god Horus. During the 4th dynasty, Jetafra had introduced the title Son of Are, establishing a symbolic link with the sun god. Building on these theological innovations, Userkaf physically manifested his relationship with Are, eventually being remembered in popular tradition as the actual offspring of the solar deity. This shift marked a transition from overt displays of political dominance to more subtle, religiously grounded assertions of royal power. This symbolic separation of the king from his people extended beyond theology. During the 4th dynasty, tombs of high-ranking officials had surrounded the royal pyramids at Giza, their closeness to the king's tomb reflecting their courtly status. But in the 5th dynasty, a deliberate separation emerged between the sacred ruler and his subjects. In death, as in life, the king was placed apart from commoners. While a new burial ground for elite officials was created at Saqqara, those of lesser rank were relegated to Giza. Meanwhile, the royal tombs themselves continued to move further away, with Userkaf's successors relocating their pyramids to Abusir. This physical distancing reflected deeper shifts in governance. In earlier periods, top administrative roles were held exclusively by royal family members. From Snefru through Menkora, every vizier had been a prince, and many heads of construction also came from the royal lineage. In a significant and far-reaching reform, Userkaf broke from this tradition by appointing men of non-royal birth to the highest offices in government. The reasons for this policy change were both ideological and practical. It elevated the royal family above the mundane tasks of administration, preserving their divine aura. Just as importantly, by transferring political authority away from royal princes, Userkaf aimed to reduce the internal disputes that had previously undermined the monarchy's stability. This reform gave rise to a new class of skilled bureaucrats who attained their positions through merit as much as through connections. As the administration evolved to accommodate greater specialization, these professionals assumed responsibilities once handled by princes. Unlike members of the royal family who could hold multiple roles by virtue of birth, professional administrators needed to focus on specific duties. From this point on, it was these capable commoners who became the driving force behind the machinery of the Egyptian state. Lacking inherited status, they had to prove themselves through performance and dedication. The emergence of a professional civil service drawn largely from the common population, along with the creation of a new necropolis where these officials could build their own tombs free from the shadow of the king's pyramid, marked a turning point in Egyptian history. These developments paved the way for the defining funerary monuments of the later Old Kingdom. For the first time, history grants us a detailed glimpse into the lives of those who served the king, revealing a world that was, in many ways, as complex and intriguing as that of the monarchy itself. Above all else, the private tombs constructed during the 5th and 6th dynasties stand as remarkable achievements of artistic expression. The refinement seen in their painted reliefs reflects the mastery of Egyptian artisans, honed through generations of work in the royal necropolises of Dahshur and Giza. With greater space available for construction and a desire to outshine their peers, the senior officials of the later Old Kingdom approached the building and embellishment of their tombs with serious intent. Tomb building became a competitive pursuit, with officials often delaying the start of construction in hopes of receiving one final promotion. Special emphasis was placed on decorating the tomb chapel where family members and visitors would bring offerings to the deceased statue. In contrast, the burial chamber, hidden below ground, was usually given only minimal decoration. The phrase "if you've got it, flaunt it" would have resonated strongly with these ancient individuals. Certain motifs were standard in tomb decoration. While an elaborate tomb served as a symbol of personal prestige in the competitive world of the Old Kingdom bureaucracy, its primary purpose was always spiritual, to protect and sustain the eternal soul of the departed. The most crucial scenes were those showing the creation and presentation of offerings, from essential items like bread and beer to luxurious goods such as fine furniture, jewelry, and wine. While these depictions offer rich insight into ancient Egyptian agriculture, craftsmanship, and cuisine, their main goal was not documentary. Instead, they functioned as a magical safeguard. According to Egyptian belief, if the actual grave goods were depleted or destroyed, these images would come to life and provide the deceased with an endless supply of all necessary items. The rows of offering bearers, shown endlessly moving toward the false door that linked the chapel to the burial chamber, were believed to be magically activated to serve the tomb's owner forever. Given the dual purpose of a tomb chapel, it is no surprise that the imagery presents an idealized vision of Egyptian life. Artists were not asked to portray reality, but to create a version of life as the tomb owner wished it to be remembered. The artwork was intended to uphold the existing social structure. For instance, the tomb owner is often shown as a towering figure, dominating each scene, while his servants are rendered at a much smaller scale, often not reaching above his knees. This use of hierarchical proportion, while odd to modern sensibilities, perfectly captures the Egyptians' preoccupation with rank and social position. Another defining characteristic of tomb art is its intentional sense of timelessness. There is little narrative development, scenes seem frozen, disconnected from time and space. Moments such as childhood, marriage, or career advancement are rarely depicted, as including them would mean preserving those stages for eternity. Instead, only the culmination was considered worthy of eternal commemoration in visual form. While scenes from tombs may not serve as accurate records of daily life, they do offer a vivid glimpse into the aspirations and fantasies of Egypt's ancient elite. The leisurely pursuits of the upper class are depicted in great detail. Merodach, a vizier from the early 6th dynasty, is portrayed painting and playing board games. In another depiction, his servants are seen preparing his bed with care, arranging the mattress, headrest, and canopy, before he reclines comfortably as his wife entertains him with harp music. On the rare occasions he was required to engage in official duties, Merodach still traveled in luxury, carried in a shaded palanquin by attendants. These portrayals are, of course, far removed from the harsh conditions endured by the rural populace, both in ancient times and today. Though many high officials of the later Old Kingdom came from non-royal backgrounds, their success in climbing the administrative ladder often led them to distance themselves entirely from the general population, retreating into a world of comfort and privilege. On rare occasions, the grim realities of life outside their elite circles were acknowledged, but only to emphasize the power and authority of the official. In Merodach's tomb, for instance, His life of leisure is starkly contrasted with the harsh punishment inflicted on tax evaders under his jurisdiction. A village leader caught in debt might be forcibly brought to the local tax office, stripped and bound to a post, and flogged with wooden sticks while scribes documented the offense and the punishment. Outside the cloistered world of the elite, life was undeniably harsh and unforgiving. This divide is perhaps most evident in depictions of health. The elite had access to medical care, including doctors and dentists, and they are consistently represented in tomb art as being in excellent physical condition. In contrast, skeletal remains and occasional tomb images suggest that the lower classes suffered from a wide array of chronic illnesses. Many of these diseases, such as schistosomiasis, remain common in Egypt today. It caused symptoms such as blood in the urine and often led to anemia, contributing to poor health and early death. Tuberculosis was also widespread, frequently deforming the spine and exacerbated by relentless physical labor. Evidence of tumors has been found on skeletons from the Old Kingdom, and some tomb scenes may even depict hernia sufferers. But apart from adding visual variety to scenes of laborers at work, illness, disability, and suffering had no place in the idealized vision promoted by the ruling class. The impression left by these depictions is of a governing elite increasingly disconnected from the lives of ordinary Egyptians. Some tomb owners, like Mereruka and his predecessor Khejemni, did hold influential posts such as vizier. Yet many others gained their privileged positions not through administrative expertise but through proximity to the king. Irikapta, for example, served as the head of palace butchers, a role central to royal dining, and his tomb at Saqqara suggests the king prioritized fine meals over efficient governance. Similarly, twin brothers Nyanknum and Khnumhotep, who jointly served as royal manicurists, were rewarded with a lavish tomb for their attentive grooming of the king's hands. Even Kentika, a vizier, owed his advancement less to his political skill than to his intimate service to the monarch. His roles included managing the king's wardrobe, overseeing his attire, guarding the secrets of the bathroom, and even supervising the royal breakfast. In a court immersed in indulgence and ceremonial privilege, the grandest tomb of the 5th dynasty at Saqqara was not built for a statesman or an overseer of public works but for Tai, the chief of palace hairdressers. Tai's tomb was an architectural marvel, featuring a large open courtyard bordered by columned porticos on all sides, a long corridor leading to additional chambers, and a dedicated room for his statue. Tai's opulent final resting place reflects a broader truth. Even though the administration had technically opened its doors to those outside the royal family, personal favor with the king remained the most effective route to power and prestige. Despite political reforms, the old traditions of patronage and privilege still held firm. The long-standing tradition of social advancement through royal favor is perfectly illustrated by the life of Hatshepsut, who lived around 2400 BC and held the distinction of owning the largest private tomb from Egypt's 5th dynasty. A pivotal moment in his career came when he entered into a second marriage. This union instantly elevated him into the innermost ranks of the royal court. His enhanced status was soon reflected in the expansion of his tomb, including the construction of an impressive entrance hall supported by columns. However, such a rapid rise in prestige came with personal costs. Hatshepsut appears to have disinherited his firstborn son from his earlier marriage, likely in favor of the children from his second, royal union. In his world, allegiance to the crown outweighed familial loyalty. The administrative reforms introduced at the start of the 5th dynasty, intended to separate the royal family from the daily functions of government, inadvertently gave rise to a bloated and increasingly arrogant bureaucracy. By the dynasty's midpoint, government roles had become so numerous that a formal hierarchy had to be established to clarify levels of privilege and importance. But as these officials grew in influence, they began to pose a challenge to the king's exclusive hold on authority, a development that could not go unchecked. Around 2350 BC, near the end of the dynasty, the monarchy initiated a sweeping administrative overhaul aimed at cutting down the number of bureaucrats and reining in their expanding influence. A key element of this reform was the decentralization of power, with more duties assigned to provincial officials. While the intention was to reduce the clout of court insiders, This shift inadvertently weakened the central authority of the state. The long-term effects of this policy would prove profound and destabilizing. Once granted a share of authority, the bureaucratic class was not easily restrained. In fact, the very group of officials whose careers shaped the later phase of the Old Kingdom would eventually contribute to its downfall. As the elite class left its imprint through a series of richly adorned tombs, the kings of the Fifth Dynasty focused on creating their own architectural legacy. The successors of Userkaf paid tribute to the sun god Ra through their royal names and constructed their pyramids at Abusir, close to Userkaf's sun temple. Though these pyramids lacked the size and solid construction of their Fourth Dynasty predecessors, they were lavishly and artistically decorated in line with the aesthetic preferences of their time. Sahura's pyramid complex alone featured an astonishing 12,000 square yards of relief carvings. These decorations introduced new themes, including depictions of deities offering foreign captives to the king and a goddess nursing the pharaoh. The refined taste of the royal court also emerged in the strategic use of contrasting stones. Sahura's Valley Temple, for example, included red granite dados and palm frond-shaped columns, a black basalt floor, upper walls made of fine white limestone, and a ceiling painted dark blue with gold stars to evoke a night sky. The entire covered causeway ascending the escarpment was lined with reliefs, and the walls of the adjacent mortuary temple were similarly adorned. The result must have been visually breathtaking. The mortuary temple served not only as the spiritual heart of the pyramid complex but also as the sanctuary for the king's statue, which was central to the religious rituals during his life and forever after. In reality, however, few of these cults endured for more than a few generations beyond the pharaoh's death. Still, a remarkable collection of papyrus documents has survived from two mortuary temples at Abusir, offering rare insight into the daily workings of a royal funerary cult in the Old Kingdom. These records reveal a culture heavily invested in meticulous record-keeping, prioritizing procedures and routines over actual care and quality. In Neferukar's temple, the staff operated on a monthly rotation. At the start of each 30-day cycle, incoming personnel were required to carry out a detailed inspection of the temple and its contents. The structure itself was assessed for damage, and every item of furniture or equipment was reviewed against a carefully organized inventory, categorized by material, form, and size. One such document listed items made from stone and flint. Under crystalline stone, in the subsection for white bowls, an inspector noted repairs to the rims, bases, and sides. A flint blade was recorded as missing chips due to being dropped, while a small silver offering table was found to be in poor condition. That these inspections occurred just 50 years after Neferukar's death illustrates how rapidly the temple's furnishings could deteriorate. Yet the emphasis appeared to lie more in the act of recording than in actual preservation. The process of monitoring was valued over maintenance, a classic example of a bureaucracy focused on appearances and routine rather than effectiveness and care, a dynamic familiar in many administratively burdened societies. Records of food and supply deliveries were kept with great care, yet even this diligence could not conceal deeper systemic shortcomings. At Neferukar's Sun Temple, 14 daily consignments of a special type of bread were scheduled. However, in one recorded year, no deliveries were made on the first, second, third, or fourth day of the month. Then, on the fifth day, 70 batches were delivered all at once. The following 6 days saw no deliveries at all, which appeared to have been disregarded entirely. In contrast, the next 11 days' shipments arrived punctually. Even in a society as rigidly organized as ancient Egypt, the regular transfer of essential provisions between royal institutions was not guaranteed. This inconsistency presents a striking contradiction to the image of Egypt as a flawlessly run, efficient civilization. It raises the possibility that the Old Kingdom's administrative system, despite its imposing monuments and apparent prosperity, may have been less stable than it appeared. For those willing to look critically, signs of eventual decline were already emerging. Unas, the final pharaoh of the Fifth Dynasty, seemed unconcerned with such issues. His focus lay in reimagining royal customs and enriching the ideological framework of kingship. Like Userkaf, he chose to construct his pyramid near the enclosure of Nedriket's step pyramid. But it wasn't just the location that marked Unas as a reformer. His most profound innovation lay beneath the surface, within the burial chambers themselves. Departing from the minimalist, undecorated interiors of earlier pyramids, Unas opted for an ornate design for his eternal dwelling. His coffin was coated in black, representing the fertile earth, while the ceiling of the burial chamber was painted dark blue, dotted with golden stars to reflect the night sky. The walls surrounding the sarcophagus were lined with white alabaster, grooved and painted to replicate a primitive shrine built from wooden frames and reed mats. The chamber was designed to serve as a symbolic representation of the universe. Most revolutionary of all was the inclusion of extensive text covering the walls of both the burial chamber and the anteroom. These texts are known today as the Pyramid Texts. They represent the earliest known collection of religious writings from ancient Egypt and the most substantial surviving body of inscriptions from the Old Kingdom. This diverse compilation of prayers, incantations, and hymns was intended to guide the king through the afterlife, helping him reach the realm of the eternal circumpolar stars. Some of these texts reflect a language and imagery so ancient they likely date back to the very beginnings of Egyptian civilization, while others were likely composed during Unas's reign at the close of the 5th dynasty. Spells, prayers, and incantations likely played a central role in all royal funerals and mortuary rituals throughout Egyptian history. However, the decision to permanently inscribe these words on the interior walls of the king's tomb to serve him eternally was a new development introduced during the reign of Unas. These inscriptions were not placed randomly on any surface. Instead, their arrangement followed a deliberate and symbolic logic, reflecting the sacred layout of the pyramid itself. Texts associated with the underworld were primarily located in the burial chamber, while the antechamber represented the horizon. In this way, the inscriptions worked in harmony with the architecture to intensify the pyramid's magical purpose, to ensure Unas's resurrection. Yet, the texts conveyed more than just magical beliefs. Unas could anticipate a glorious rebirth not only because of spiritual rites but because he wielded absolute authority. In the theological worldview of his time, the king's divine right was backed by unmatched power. This bold concept is vividly illustrated in one of the most notorious passages of the Pyramid Texts. Known as the Cannibal Hymn, it delivers a disturbing image of royal dominance. A short excerpt reveals its stark tone. Unas is the one who eats men, who feeds on the gods. He consumes their magic, devours their spirits. The mighty ones are his breakfast. The lesser ones his dinner. The little ones his evening meal. The old among them he offers in sacrifice. The authors of Unas's funerary texts were making an unambiguous declaration. The king's supremacy stemmed from his ability to absorb the divine powers through an act of spiritual consumption. His path to eternal life was unstoppable. He embodied dominion over all forces, earthly or celestial. This harsh assertion of authority over the gods also hinted at the king's attitude toward his human subjects. Although few historical records survive from Unas's reign, and depictions of military conflict are scarce, one haunting sequence from the decorative reliefs along his pyramid's causeway suggests a chilling chapter of human suffering. These scenes, portraying famine in painful detail, resonate deeply with modern viewers familiar with similar images from humanitarian crises. In one scene, a frail man, close to death, is held upright by his gaunt wife and a concerned companion. In another, a starving woman resorts to eating lice from her own scalp. A young boy, his belly swollen from hunger, pleads for food. The depictions are agonizingly real, yet the individuals are anonymous. It is highly unlikely that these figures represented native Egyptians, given that funerary art was meant to project idealized perfection. The more plausible interpretation is that the starving people were desert-dwelling tribes, possibly the descendants of Egypt's earliest pastoral communities, who continued to survive in the barren lands flanking the Nile Valley. Their depiction served as a grim contrast to Egyptian prosperity and a stark warning to the king's subjects. Life outside the realm of Unas's rule was one of suffering and despair. Despite the spiritual sophistication and ceremonial grandeur of the 5th dynasty, the authoritarian model of kingship never truly vanished.